Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next session, where our panel will discuss why patients want to get involved in research, what happens with their data when they do participate, and what are some of the barriers to keeping lines of communication open about that patient's data. Joining us in this panel are Dr. Barbara Bierer, Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School and the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Dr. Gwen Nichols, Chief Medical Officer at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and John Olwal, Head of Tech Ethics and Data Privacy at Takeda. Moderating the panel is fellow Research America board member, Dr. Reece. Al is Dean Emeritus and former University Executive Vice President and Endowed Professor and Director at the Center for Advanced Research Training and Innovation, and the Co-Director for the Center for Birth Defects Research at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Al, over to you.
Thank you, Derek. I want to welcome our panelists. I think we have a pretty exciting event planned this afternoon, so I look forward to active participation. So what I'm going to do is basically, we'll be focusing on what happens with my health research data, what happens to it. And so this is a very important area. Clinical trials and patient participation is a very important part of the research ecosystem. Today, our focus will be on the mystery, how we demystify, if you will, clinical trials and research, patient participation in research and their health data. Now, when we say data too could mean various things to different people. But for today, we're going to use the term data to broadly refer to information that is collected in a study. It could be measurements from a variety of tissues, where they have to be blood or specimens, blood or urine or biopsy specimen, or even measurements from health data. Now, as you know, health data can be very unique and personal. And each individual may have a very unique level of comfort or privacy concern. And sometimes to make it even more complicated, the researchers ourselves may not always use the same rules. So patients become very uncomfortable when they hear different things from different people at different times, if they happen to have participated in more than one study. So we have lots to talk about. This is an area that I think is rich with interest, sometimes a little misunderstanding, let's not call it confusion, misunderstanding, and we're here to demystify that. So I'm going to start with a question that I'll pose to Gwen, and start right at the beginning. Gwen, why and how do patients participate in research, given what I just laid out, the landscape? Why would they do it?
Well, I can talk about an example that I think is really instructive. So normally the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society funds research, and we don't do our own internal research other than for business purposes. We are not, we are scientists, but we don't have a laboratory. we work in offices. And so we had explored in 2020, when we heard about how badly blood cancer patients fared when they got COVID infection. Early in the pandemic, up to 30% of hospitalized blood cancer patients succumbed to the disease. And so this was, struck myself and my Chief Scientific Officer, Lee Greenberger, as something we needed to act upon. And we went to our academic colleagues that we fund and that we know, and said, how can we find out? The vaccines are about to be rolled out. How do we know that our blood cancer patients will respond to these vaccines? Because none of them were included in the vaccine trials, understandably. That's not, you test healthy normals first to find out if the vaccine works. But we had no data. And we asked our colleagues, they weren't able to do it. And so instead, they said, well, we're thinking about it, we're planning it, it'll take us about 9 months to get started. We were understandably concerned and said they're getting vaccines now, we need to start. We built a registry. We got an informed consent. We had IRB approval within, 40 days. And we put the word out to patients connected to LLS that we would provide information for them about their vaccine response if they provided information about when they got vaccinated and gave us access to some of their health records so that we could see how they progressed if they had a vaccine response. We assumed about 1,000 patients over a 9-month period would participate in this. And that's what we told our vendor who was helping us with the record collection. In 3 months, we had 12,000 patients who agreed, signed the consent, and filled out forms about what vaccine they got and went to the laboratory and got a blood test done. So we had a huge amount of data, and this was published in Cancer Cell within the year of starting the study. And so we realized that when patients, as confusing as informed consents can be, as complicated as saying we want access to some of your health records, when patients know, number one, they trust the doctor, the institution, LLS, and they know within that we said, we are using your data for this reason, and you will get the results. They actively want to participate because they understand why this is important to them and to other people. And we were able to give information about safety of the vaccine within 2 or 3 months on our website. We'd had 2,500 patients safely vaccinated in a couple of months and could say no significant untoward reactions. That was a big plus for patients who were scared, understandably scared about getting vaccinated.
That was an excellent example. I mean, that is the art of communication, compelling communication, clearly, wonderful example. I'm going to shift to both Barbara and John. I have a 3-part question for you, just for you. My 3-part question is A, what patient data are used for? What are they used for? And to what extent do patients have access to that information? And if they do, would they understand it? If not, why not?
After you, John.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks for the question. So I think I'll focus more on the use of patients' data. I think before I get into that, it's very important that in the business where we are, we cannot do without patients. And it is primarily to support the patient community, to enable them really live a healthy or live a life that adds value to themselves and to their loved ones. So that is very important. Patients' data is so important because it drives a few aspects. As it enables a company like Takeda actually to gain more insights. So if you have more data, or if you have data, you can gain more insights on the patients themselves, because every patient is actually an individual. This is something that sometimes is being mixed up by bundling patients as patients. But at the end of it, every individual has specific needs, and every individual has certain challenges that they face due to the ecosystem where they come from, and therefore that data may give more insights on the individual themselves. And then, of course, it also tells a lot about the disease itself, because research never ends. When you collect this data, it may help you inform more about how the disease progression is. It may inform you about more elements that need to be addressed when it comes to that disease. So the data that patients provide does not only help the patient, but also maybe help other patients who may have similar challenges because we know more about the disease going forward. So that's a benefit to the society. And then, of course, it enables personalized treatments, which is becoming more and more necessary. So if I have data about the patients, I could be able to frame the treatment to that specific patients and based on the needs of that patient, so that we don't just have a standard treatment methodology to address a patient's need. And then, of course, it identifies the trends and developments that are taking place within the patient's journey, because at every stage of a patient, there are patterns, the elements that you can monitor, and you could inform about a patient's journey. And based on that, the HCPs or the researchers could at least adjust on the requirements and the needs of that patient as it progresses. So these are a few things that I think collecting that data helps us with, helps the patients, helps the loved ones around the patients or other patients, and also the society as a whole. And with that, I hand over to you, Barbara.
Thank you. So
Great.
wonderful beginning of, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just shifting. Go
So
ahead.
wonderful beginning of the conversation. So I think, there are two kinds of data, those that are collected in a research project or a research study, and those that are collected because you're a patient and along the journey itself. And I think those are different because on the one hand, we do have an informed consent as Gwen so eloquently described, and on the other, it is part of your clinical care. Both are useful and both give the kind of insights that John has commented on. And of course, it is true that every individual is an individual, whether they're a participant or a patient, and that we need to be clear that when you collect the data for a research question, it's to answer that research question. But in many ways, the reanalysis of that data may contribute to further insights and future science and discovery. I think it's very important that we're clear with patients and participants about what data we're collecting, why we're collecting it, and for what. And that there should be transparency around that, and patients and participants should have a choice. If they don't want to participate in the study question, they don't need to. But if they don't want to participate in future use of the data, that's also something that they should have a choice around. We do our best to protect the privacy and confidentiality of that data by anonymizing it or stripping it of the personal sensitive data. But, there are no guarantees if that data is downloaded. There can be guarantees if it's protected in certain ways. I do think that the other point that Gwen said that I want to just, underscore is that in the study that she described, they returned the results to the patients. They were very explicit about getting the data and then giving them something back. It's both volunteerism, but it's also to their benefit to know whether or not they responded, for instance, to the vaccine. And I think we've done a disservice to our patients and participants in not returning the data routinely, either about the clinical trial itself. We found this, we compared A versus B, and A did this and B did that, or about your own data. What data should you be able to get? You should always be able to get your clinical data, that data that's done in a clinical laboratory, maybe not a research question, maybe not some new biomarker, which we don't understand, but certainly the things that we do understand and can be given back to you with some level of confidence in the result. The third question you asked was, what happens if you don't understand the result or you don't understand the data? What do you do? And that's a really interesting question, because by the time you get the data back, sometimes your investigator and your study team is around, but sometimes they're long gone. You've gone back to your healthcare practitioner, where you usually get your care, less often in leukemia and lymphoma than other diseases, but certainly in routine clinical trials. And then I think it's incumbent upon the study team to make arrangements to explain it, to be available, or to have a call center, or places like Takeda to be able to have a call center where people can ask those questions. I think that we do, a disservice by not engaging the participants throughout their journey, both at the front end, but also at the tail end of a clinical trial, to make sure that we've explained what we've found, to thank them, and then to explain the results themselves.
Excellent. That nicely tied up with what Gwen related earlier. So Gwen, I'm going to have asked you another question now. And that is, the story is getting back to your story. It was so compelling and exciting and just exhilarating that I want to pick up from where you left off. And that is, how did this turn out in a natural history study? And what are some lessons that you learned from that experience that you can apply in other circumstances? It's too good a story just to end like that.
Well, I think I'm going to tag on to what Barbara said. So we were very intentional about, number one, we still don't know whether antibody response levels or positivity is in any way protective. We have assumptions, we have beliefs, but the jury is still out. And so for us to say, oh, your level is moderate, or your level is high, or you aren't making any antibody, there was a worry, there was a concern that we were throwing information out that put the patient in a quandary and didn't answer the question. And so we gave a lot of explanation. We made sure that they shared this information with their own primary doctors to decide what to do. We had a nurse who answered calls for patients specifically who had participated in this study. We put out information about likelihood of being more at risk, and therefore gave suggestions for what patients should do to protect themselves. So, just giving a lab result is not the answer to the question. You need to, you really do need someone who can help guide the patient to understand what those results mean. What we learned was that so many of these patients were interested in continuing to find out more information about COVID as the pandemic went on. They wanted to know how many months after I stopped my Rituxan, which depletes your B cells, and many lymphoma and CLL patients are on Rituxan, will I be able to mount a response? When can I go out of the house? There were so many subsequent studies and surveys that we could do, because patients wanted information for themselves, but also for the population in general. And I guess I was so impressed with how many people wanted to participate, and also continued to want to help get answers for future patients. It filled me with a very good sense of hope for the future. And during a time when there was a lot of question about belief in science and in research, the people who the research is going to help get it. And they want to be part of it. And so I felt positive at a time when it wasn't always positive.
It's a compelling story. And at the end, I'm going to just share with you a brief story that further affirms your story, and maybe in of itself will indicate that it's it's the approach that one takes. It's the relationship that one builds that actually makes the difference. John, I have one for you. We want to shift gears a little bit and talk about risks.
Yeah.
And there are risks sometimes to patients and those who are using data. What do you think are, or what do you know, maybe some best practices to ethically collect and use data? And how could you put some protection in there? Because, you know, the issue of risk is not happenstance. Risks do occur and consequences do occur. So what sort of safeguards would you put in place or would you promote that would ensure that these risks are at least addressed or taken care of ahead of time?
So that's an excellent question, because what we see a lot is there's always business pressure, and there's always need to do more of this, more of research, but sometimes not necessarily factoring in that the data that we are using is the data is the person, because any data now with the technology. So there are different frameworks and there are different measures that you can take to be able to protect the data. And the core of that framework for me is always trust. In that framework, it's trust. And that's about the relationship between the patient and the institution or the individual who is interested, or the subject and individual who is interested in that data. That have been working start by thinking about the principles. What are the principles that we are talking about here? As we say, trust is important. That means you have to build a relationship and you need to have a very transparent way of the individuals or the patients understanding what you want to do with their data. So the understanding is very, very important. And if they can't understand it themselves, at least have a mechanism that the patient group or the patient community in that area understand that and can explain it to a way that they can digest and understand it as a patient, or in frameworks where the loved ones could be understanding that. So the principles are very important, and under that principle, transparency is very key. Second to this transparency is always about protecting the data itself. You know, when you have that data, you need to have measures in place that data is protected, because the moment someone else gets access to that data and misuses that data, you're still accountable and responsible because you are the person who collected that information. So security of that data is very important, and putting measures in place, if possible, that data could be used only for the purposes that it was collected for. These are very important principles that most data collectors or most organizations need to put in place, and it helps them build the trust, which is the core of everything. So in some organizations, you find they have a framework, and that framework has elements like Takeda, we have trust, reputation, yeah, which is very important. And then we will, of course, have also the patient in that framework. So we start by looking at the patient, then we look at the trust elements in our framework, then we look at the transparency, rather on how we are more transparent with the patient in this case. And then, of course, at the end of it, you look at also the business element. But in all that, also the reputation of the organization, because we also want to protect our reputation to have better relationship in future with our stakeholders, which includes the patient. So this kind of frameworks do work. For institutions like us, you need to think also about data trusts. And data trusts could be shared. It could be HCPs. It could be shared with the patients themselves. It could also be shared with the organizations, and build ethical components around that data trust so that the data trust could be shared in a way that everyone has built confidence on how the data is being handled.
Well, John, we're going to be short in time. I have a few questions that I don't think I can get in there, but I want to. There's one.
Oh, did I lose?
Al, I think you're frozen. There you are. Try again.
It says my internet is unstable. That's what it says. Okay. The question I have, can you hear me now? Am I?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
We're short of time. So one area of really important, great importance is the area of data ownership or portability. And essentially, who has jurisdiction over data and who can access that data for the future? It's always an area of contention. Is it the investigator? Is it the patient? Is it the institution? Can the investigator take it with him or her when they leave the institution, or the institution, you have to leave it? Those, if you could just answer those in really short. I have one more question I want to throw in before we go ahead. Barbara, please, try. You going to try that one?
Sure, that's a complicated one. I think that we're changing our opinion. It used to be like 30 years ago that the investigator or the company thought that they owned that data. We no longer, support that view or believe that. We think we're, in terms of as a healthcare facility or as a company or as a nonprofit that has this data, we're stewards of the data. We take care of the data. We don't own the data. The patient or the participant continues to own their data. They should be empowered to decide what they want to do with it. I think that what we do have is the ability to be, as John says, transparent about what we plan to use it for, and then stick to what we've said. And we can use it going forward for what we've said we would use it for. And in some ways that is allows us to predict what uses there might be of it. But we do that under the guardrails of, ethics review and consent, and having the ability to sort of define that. There are some uses that we couldn't predict today, but will be useful later on. We couldn't possibly have envisioned some of the studies or the questions that we'd want to ask 20 years ago today, and we don't want to have to start building a biobank, for instance, today for the questions of tomorrow. So I do think there are ways there of doing, of anonymizing or de-identifying the data, keeping it protected, but still answering very important questions under the oversight of an ethics committee. But I don't think we own the data, and I don't think that it's ours to do whatever we want with. I think that it remains as it were, the property of the individual who voluntarily gave it to us. I do think that raises the question of portability. And I do think we should be trying to find ways of having the participant or patient have access to their data and to keep it so that they can use it as they wish. They can return it to their physicians. They can take it and give it to their, loved ones if they want, whatever they want to do, in addition to what they've given us permission to do with it. Which all goes back to this element of trust. You have to do what you say you're going to do, and you have to say what you plan to do, and stay in your lane.
So, Barbara, that was excellent. Excellent summary. I want to end on where we started. And I think Gwen started by talking about patient engagement, if you will. And John mentioned patient trust. And I would say those are key elements: patient engagement, patient information sharing. They do understand. You just need to break it down in an appropriate level. So patient information, patient engagement, developing the trust and transparency. Those are elements that I think we all discussed in various ways, and it really results in a high level of effectiveness in doing so. So at this time, it seems as if we're out of time. I wish we had more time to continue, but all good things need to come to an end. So, Eric, I think I want to turn it back to you now. We are on time, but out of time.
Oh, you could spend a lot more time on that topic. It's such an important one. We all know that that patient recruitment is such a critical factor in successful trials, and the reason why so many of them take a long time to even get going, et cetera. I think this panel was also a great follow-on to the prior one, dealing with exactly as you just emphasized, Al, that issue of trust. And as we talk about misinformation and disinformation, this fits right into it too, having the respect for the patient and believing that they have a right to be treated with respect throughout. So Barbara, Gwen, John, Al, thank you all very much for this panel. Next up in 8 minutes, go back to the lobby, if you would, please, everybody, for a fireside chat with Dr. Elias Zerhouni and Dr. Dietmar Berger on the future of research and innovation. So again, that will start at 1:50 Eastern time in the lobby. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.